Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna. Le ministre des Ressources naturelles, Jim Carr. Et le ministre des Pêches, des Océans et de la Guerre côtière, Dominic LeBlanc.
Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Jonathan Wilkinson, je suis le membre du Parlement pour Nord Vancouver et secrétaire parlementaire à la ministre de l'Environnement et du Changement climatique. Notre séance ce matin est intitulée « Protéger l'environnement et faire croître l'économie ». Et nous sommes chanceux d'avoir avec nous les trois ministres clés responsables de faire certain que la progression économique et le développement durable s'en vont ensemble dans toutes les décisions que nous prenons. So we have with us today Catherine McKenna, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and Jim Carr, Minister of Natural Resources. I should say that Jim is actually celebrating a bit of an anniversary today. It is, I think, 50 years this week that Jim was elected to be the head of the Manitoba High School Liberal Association. And Dominic says that he wasn't born at that point, so. I'm going to ask each of the ministers to provide comments on a number of topics that relate to how our government is working to ensure that the environment and the economy go together. I think it's an interesting panel from the perspective that you have a fair bit of regional diversity here. So Dominic obviously is from Atlantic Canada, Catherine from Ontario, Jim from the Prairies, and I'm actually from British Columbia. Over the past decade, one of the key things I think that Canadians were very concerned about, and we heard about it a lot during the last campaign, was the lack of concern for environmental matters that was shown on the part of the Harper government. They gutted the environmental assessment process, they ignored critical issues like climate change, and they were entirely deaf to some of the really important issues that we've been working on around biodiversity. Indigenous Canadians felt that their concerns were not being heard. This had implications not only for the environment, but obviously it had significant implications for the economy as well. Major projects were stalled and had a very great difficulty proceeding, in part because people lost faith in the environmental processes that existed within the government. And I think Canadians sent a clear message in 2015 that they wanted a government that actually would work to ensure that environmental protection and economic progress would go hand in hand. So today's conversation is really around how the government has been working to deliver on the commitment that we made during the campaign, some of the particular challenges that we are facing, and some of the key topical issues that are under discussion on the national stage presently. So I'd like to start with Minister McKenna and talk a little bit about climate change. One of the key tasks that Catherine was actually asked to take on by the Prime Minister when she was appointed as Minister was to go to Paris to be part of the conversation around agreeing on an international agreement to address the climate change issue. I think you were in the job about 4 days or something like 2 days before you went to Paris. And I think all Canadians are very proud of the role that Canada played in Paris and the role that Catherine played in ensuring that we actually came to an agreement on an international basis to address this. Following from Paris, of course, we did a lot of work with the provinces and territories to come up with a plan to ensure that we were making good on the commitments that we had made. And so perhaps you can talk a little bit about what we've accomplished so far on the climate file, what some of the key next steps are, and how some of the measures that we're undertaking or are planning to undertake are important from an economic perspective as well as an environmental perspective.
Well, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Jonathan. Il est le meilleur secrétaire parlementaire qu'on pourrait avoir. He's really an awesome parliamentary secretary. So look, climate change is real. We know that. We're seeing impacts across the country. You can talk about the economic case. We've gone from insurance claims, $400 million a year, to over $1 billion a year. That's just going to go up. That's drought, that's floods, that's forest fires. Prince Edward Island is receding by 43 centimeters a year. And then we have the high Arctic. And I want to spend 1 second on this because it is important that we focus on the environment and what's changing in terms of the climate. So I was in the high Arctic. I was on a ship. We had climate scientists, we had Inuit elders, and we had Inuit youth. Inuit youth came to me. He was 15 years old. He was from Cambridge Bay, and he said, I want to talk to you about what I think are the impacts of climate change. Maybe you could tell me if they're right. I brought one of our amazing public servants from Environment and Climate Change Canada, and we sat down. And he said, our caribou are disappearing. That's our country food. And our scientist said, yeah, that's a sign. The polar bears, it's harder to find them. Often they're thinner, they're scavenging for food. And they said, yeah, that's a sign. And the third thing almost broke my heart. He said that 3 of my friends have lost their fathers because when they go hunting, they go and they fall through the ice and can never be found. And why is that happening? Because these are Inuit hunters, they're brothers, they're providers, they're uncles, falling through the ice because they no longer can tell the thickness of the ice. They've been able to do that for millennia. And so this is having a real impact on people. But the thing is, I always say, like, it's just true that the environment and the economy go together, and that's where Canadians are at. I know this is where everyone in the room is at, but that's where Canadians are at. They know climate change is real, and they want us to take action, and they see the huge economic opportunity. Alors, j'étais il y a 2 jours en France avec le Premier ministre. Quel était le premier sujet entre le Premier ministre et le président Macron? C'était les changements climatiques. Alors, on a signé un accord entre la France et le Canada pour attaquer au changement climatique, mais aussi pour le financement vert, pour avoir une opportunité de coopérer ensemble sur le clean tech. We also had a clean tech mission with us in France, and we signed deals. These are companies that are providing solutions across the board that are game-changing solutions, but are creating good jobs here in Canada. These are solutions we're creating, and then we're exporting them. Last week, I was with Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, our greatest export. We're calling back that loan sometime soon. But with the finance minister, with companies from the energy sector, from financial institutions, major banks, pension funds, insurance companies, talking about what? Talking about how we need to move to a low-carbon economy, talking about the risks and how we need to disclose climate risks, and the huge $30 trillion economic opportunity. That is a game changer. How often do you think the Minister of Environment gets to sit down with the finance minister and the governor of the Bank of England and major companies representing, a huge percentage of the Canadian economy? Like, the world has changed, and for people, for politicians to pretend that we don't have to tackle climate change and there's no economic opportunity is just misreading what is happening all over the world. And yeah, you should clap for that, that's good. But I want to reassure you that there are awesome things going on across the country. So when I was in China, I went and visited the city of Fushan. They've bought a whole fleet of Ballard fuel cell buses. Those are Canadian-made buses, Canadian technologies creating good jobs here. I was in Alberta, Landmark Homes, net zero homes. We are building better homes. Why shouldn't we have homes that are net zero? I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I was with New Flyer buses. These are buses that are being used, they're electric buses, hydrogen buses being used in places like San Francisco. And just right here, I know Darren Fisher, I'm looking at you, get off your phone, unless you're tweeting all of this. Nice, tweet it. Carbon Cure. Carbon Cure is a Dartmouth company that, you know what they do? Do you guys know it's this is a game changer. So cement has a lot of, and concrete has a lot of emissions. So what has this guy done, Rob Niven from Carbon Cure? He came up with the ability to take emissions from the air, bad, we don't want pollutions, and inject it into cement to make cheaper, stronger cement. I was in a factory in California seeing them use this technology. This is amazing, and when you look at even in even the high Arctic in Labrador, they've come up with smart ice technology, able to tell the thickness of the ice to stop people from going in. Why am I telling you this? And I know Jonathan's like, stop it. I want to tell you more stories because the world has changed. The world has changed when we have a huge opportunity to be in the center of this. People are very impressed by what we're doing abroad, what we've been able to do at home. I want to give a shout out to provinces like Alberta, Ontario, BC, Quebec, but across the board, provinces are working hard to tackle climate change. But at the end of the day, why do I wake up every day and work so damn hard in this job? Because I've got 3 kids, and we owe it to our kids to figure this out. We owe it to make sure that they have a sustainable planet, and we owe it to make sure that they have good, clean jobs, and that is exactly what we're doing.
So as you can hear, the Minister of the Environment is very, very impassioned with the climate issue. Dominic, another key pillar of the government's commitment with respect to the environment is, of course, the health and well-being of our oceans, whether that is here on the East Coast, on the West Coast, or in the northern reaches of Canada. Similar to the work that we've undertaken on climate change, we've put into place a lot of measures to both protect the oceans that have significant implications for our economy. And so one of the announcements that I think you made alongside Minister Garneau was the $1.5 billion Oceans Protection Plan. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that plan and about what we're doing with respect to oceans more generally.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Jonathan. C'est toujours agréable d'être ici avec Catherine et Jim. Jonathan a bien posé la question importante, non seulement pour nous au Canada Atlantique, mais en Colombie-Britannique, au Yukon et au Grand Nord canadien. La protection de nos océans demeure pour notre gouvernement une priorité très importante. Une priorité très importante. Le premier ministre a dit à Marc Garneau, à moi, à nos collègues ici, qu'il fallait faire en sorte que nous avons parmi les meilleurs systèmes de surveillance, de protection environnementale, d'avis scientifiques quant aux changements qu'on voit dans les océans et surtout quant aux espèces qui sont souvent en difficulté. Et on voit ça avec les baleines, que ce soit les épaulards résidents du Sud-Est ou les baleines noires dans le golfe du Saint-Laurent. So the Prime Minister asked Marc Garneau and me to work on an ambitious agenda of ocean protection for Canada. And by the way, it's also going to be one of the important themes of the G7 summit that the Prime Minister will be hosting in Charlevoix, Quebec in early June. We've decided to follow up, and the world, in fact, is looking at ocean protections. If you saw last night at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London, England, the Prime Minister was there. The Prime Minister of Great Britain is also focusing on oceans. But Canada has a unique opportunity, we think, to lead a global discussion on ocean protection. So if the government added $1.5 billion new dollars, additional money, it's for things like ocean science, marine science, including freshwater science. It's also about understanding, as Catherine said, what climate change does in terms of ocean protection, but also in terms of coastal resilience. 500 million people around the world live in coastal zones. So climate change, acidification of the oceans, the warming of the oceans, the melting of the polar ice cap, all of these things can have devastating consequences around the world, in Canada, but around the world, in terms of coastal resilience, coastal protection. So we're trying to position Canada to be a global leader in technology, in science, in marine protection, but we're also changing legislation. And I'll finish with this. One of the things that the Prime Minister asked me to do was to change the Fisheries Act to restore the lost protections. Mr. Harper's government had deleted some of the important environmental protections around fish and fish habitat in legislation. In their omnibus budget bills of 2012, devastated basically our ability as a government and my department's ability to protect fish and fish habitat. We restored those protections, but we went further. The Prime Minister asked us to incorporate modern safeguards. So what we're saying to Canadians is, it's one thing to protect fish habitat, but we also have, as a government and as a country, a responsibility to restore the habitat that may have been endangered. We also have a responsibility to restore fish stocks that are under threat. Alors, nous avons incorporé ça dans les projets de loi, les amendements sur la loi sur les pêches, et nous allons continuer de faire en sorte que des milliers de Canadiens qui gagnent leur vie des océans. I mean, this is a huge economic driver too. We're sitting in Halifax this morning. The lobster industry in this province alone is worth almost $1 billion. So if you think about the good middle-class jobs in coastal communities 15 minutes from here that depend on properly managing ocean resources sustainably, I think the government has an important role to play, and Canadians really want us to do the best possible, and that's something that our government tries to do every day. Merci, Jonathan.
Merci. So Jim, climate change is obviously creating an imperative around thinking about cleaner ways of doing business and thinking forward about an economy that, as we move towards a lower carbon future, is going to be able to provide the kind of standard of living that Canadians have come to enjoy and expect. One of the things that I know that you have been focused on is thinking through this energy transition. How do we actually think about creating this kind of innovation-based economy? How do we think about moving our natural resource sectors towards being part of that and themselves greening what they do on an ongoing basis? And so maybe you can talk a little bit about the energy transition that we're facing and the work that NRCan is doing in that regard.
Just for the record, though, 50 years ago, when I was beavering away at the high schools, Dominic was 4 months old, and the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change was -3. In more recent times, last October in my home city of Winnipeg, we called a conference called Generation Energy, and 650 people showed up from every nook and cranny of Canada and from around the world. And they came, among other things, to talk about what people had told us online for 6 months before then. On the website, 380,000 people gave us an opinion on what they thought Canada's energy mix would look like in a generation. It was a remarkable meeting. And what struck me was that at some moment during those 2 days, every single person in the room was uncomfortable. Those who represented the environmental movement were uncomfortable when they were listening to people in the oil and gas sector. Others were uncomfortable when they heard Indigenous people assert their rights and their aspiration to be full partners in resource development in Canada. Others were uncomfortable when the subject came to clean technologies and investment in renewable sources of energy. And I said, I'm glad you were all uncomfortable, because if nobody experienced discomfort, we advanced nothing and we learned nothing at all. And I was also struck by how similar the conversation was in Winnipeg to the ones that I have been experiencing internationally at G7 and G20 meetings in Paris or Beijing or South America. It doesn't matter. Every single country in the world is talking about the transition to a low-carbon economy. No one is sure how long that will take. Probably decades, no one knows for sure, but the trajectory is clear, and Canada is better placed than any other country in the world to lead. Why? Because of our abundance of natural resources, because of our capacity to innovate, because of what we have shown time and time again, that the spirit of entrepreneurship in Canada is second to none in the world. It would make no sense to leave the riches we have in the ground at a time when we can move them more sustainably, at a time when we can extract them more sustainably, so that we can help finance the transition. And I think the only people in the country who don't understand this are the Conservatives. Because as Catherine has said, when she sits down with the CEOs of major companies, they're not only talking about transition, they're investing in it. And the spirit of entrepreneurship and the innovators of Alberta will lead the way, just as they led the way to open up these riches that we're now extracting more sustainably and moving more safely than ever before. I'm excited about Canada in the world, our capacity to show everybody that a commitment from government, working and incenting the private sector, understanding that the trajectory is clear, will place us well internationally while we discharge our international obligations, while we partner with Indigenous people who have to be a part of this prosperity, It's an exciting time for Canada in the energy world.
So we've talked a little bit about the government's approach and commitment to the climate file, about how we're actually working to protect our oceans, and about the perspective on the energy transition. And so now is probably an appropriate time to talk about one of the national discussions that's going on today around a particular project, which is the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And maybe we can start with Jim and then have both Dominic and Catherine make a few comments on a couple of different things. What are the economic benefits associated with this, and how does that relate to our commitment to strengthening the middle class? How does this fit?
There are direct and indirect economic benefits. We could talk about the $7.4 billion of investment and the 15,000 jobs that it will create, but for the sake of the Canadian economy, the broader conversation is about expanding our export markets. 99% of Canada's export of oil and gas goes to one country, the United States. I'm not comfortable with that, are you? If we expand our export markets, then we're going to have to find a way to get our resources to Asia. And the way to get our resources to Asia is to take a pipeline that was built in 1953 and that has been moving the same product that is going to be moving now for 30 years. The increase in tanker traffic will be one vessel a day, surrounded by world-class spill response because of our $1.5 billion investment in the Ocean Protection Plan. We are now losing $15 billion a year because of the discounted price of Canadian oil. Why wouldn't we get a world price? Why wouldn't we expand our export markets? Meanwhile, co-developing with Indigenous communities up and down the line to make sure that they're involved in securing the safety of construction and throughout the life cycle. 43 Indigenous communities have signed benefit agreements, 33 of them in British Columbia. We're under no illusions about how controversial these projects are. They divide political parties. We have a new Democratic Premier of Alberta and a new Democratic Premier of British Columbia. Do you think they see eye to eye on this project? Indigenous communities themselves have various points of view that we have to respect. Within our party, there will be those who think that pipelines are not a great idea, but when they hear the arguments about the alternatives of moving the product by rail or by pipeline, investing in the Canadian economy in a way that doesn't benefit one region of the country, but benefits all of Canada, I think they'll see that the position we have taken, and that is that the three pillars of responsible energy development, job creation, environmental stewardship, Indigenous partnerships.
Dominic, do you want to say a couple words?
Well, Jonathan, I mean, we as a government, and Jim just went through probably the most topical and certainly in recent weeks, the most discussed example of balancing the economy and the environment. They go together. The Prime Minister has said that the Conservatives didn't understand that. They focused only on the economy and didn't understand that the environment has to go with it. The New Democratic Party at various times has focused on the other side of that conversation, not understanding that you need a growing, sustainable economy to provide prosperity for Canadians and allow governments to invest in the priorities of Canadians. So I think Jim identified the merit of actually putting the economy and the environment together and developing sustainably resources that Canadians and the Canadian economy can depend on. Jonathan, I wanted, excuse me, to share another example. I see our colleague Serge Cormier from Acadie Bathurst in northern New Brunswick is here. Yesterday, Serge and I were in his riding in northern New Brunswick in a fishing community called Shippigan, discussing with fish plant workers and harvesters themselves, fishers, some rules that we put into place to try and protect the North Atlantic right whale. It's a very highly endangered species of marine mammal, spends half its time in the United States waters, half the time in Canadian waters. Last summer, there were a number of alarming deaths of North Atlantic right whales off the coast of Canada. And Serge and I had to tell the fish harvesters and the fish plant workers why we put in place these stringent rules to protect these highly endangered marine mammals, because we worried about access to global markets, certification, sustainable certification of Canadian fish and seafood. The snow crab industry in northern New Brunswick is worth about $700 or $800 million. And the people we met with, the fish plant workers and others who depend on the local economy, have an average income of less than $30,000. So if you want to make it real for people, there's an example où nous avons rencontré des gens en situation économique très, très précaire, et nous avons expliqué comment des protections environnementales sont essentielles pour l'avenir de leur pêche au crabe des neiges. Et ça m'a rappelé un peu les discussions que nous avons eues au caucus, à des congrès comme aujourd'hui à Halifax. Et pour moi, c'était un exemple simplement de hier où l'équilibre, où la réalité que l'environnement et l'économie doivent nécessairement coexister. Autrement, franchement, ces gens en situation économique très vulnérable auront complètement perdu leur capacité de gagner leur vie.
So I want to talk about this because this is really, really important. It's much bigger than one pipeline. It's become kind of a big microcosm of where the debate can go on the environment and the economy. So first of all, the context. When we came into power as government, we acknowledged that the previous government had gutted environmental assessments. So Jim and I, hand in hand, as you always hear us, environment and economy, we announced that we were bringing in interim principles for projects. We knew the decisions needed to be made on science, facts, evidence, Indigenous knowledge. We knew that we needed to be making sure that we looked at the climate impacts of projects. We knew that also that we needed to be working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, but no project had to go to the starting line. That's a basic principle. I mean, we have to be, smart about how we attract investment. We incorporated those principles into the decision around the twinning of the Trans Mountain expansion. So Jim has talked about that. We approved the project, and I'm going to go into the factors, but the BC government approved this project a year ago. And here we are relitigating this. And what does that do for certainty for investment in our country is anytime another government comes in, they decide they're going to throw things out the window. That is not good for investment. And I care greatly for investment. I care about investment in renewables. I care about investment in our natural resources. Why? Because I care about people and jobs. So I'm very proud to represent Ottawa Centre, but I'm also from the Hammer. And as I say, I'm the environment minister for environmentalists and steelworkers, for Indigenous peoples and Inuit and First Nations and Métis. I'm an environment minister for everyone, and these are robust conversations. So now let's talk about the facts, the science, the evidence around the Trans Mountain expansion. So I know people are like, well, wait a minute, climate change, how could you do this? So the reality is, and as you guys know, I care more about taking action on climate change, or as much as anyone here. But we looked at the climate impacts of this project, both in light of our national climate plan, which is putting a price on pollution, what you don't want. So what you get what you do want, which is innovation and lower GHGs, in light of phasing out of coal, in light of investments in energy efficiency to save people money, historic investments in public transportation. I could go across the board, but also in light of Alberta's climate plan. So in Alberta, we have a government that is absolutely committed to to diversifying their economy, to making sure they take serious climate action. What have they done? They put a price on pollution. That is like a game changer in Alberta. We had to get a national plan. We needed Alberta to be on side. They are phasing out coal. They're one of the 4 provinces on coal. We need to be supporting them and supporting communities and workers that might be impacted. And third, they put a hard cap on emissions in the oil sands. So this project fits within that cap. And that is really important because remember, we said we would make decisions based on facts, science, and evidence. In terms of the oceans, I know people in British Columbia are concerned about the oceans. We hear that. I'm desperately concerned about the oceans. I'm a swimmer. I swim in every ocean I can get to, even in the middle of the winter. And that's why we made the investments in the Oceans Protection Plan, $1.5 billion world-class plan that will help across the board, not just in the tankers, the additional one tanker a week that we're going to see, but across the board on the coast, well, on all coasts, but in British Columbia. We're going to have extra tugs that are going to accompany tankers. We've reopened the Kitsilano Coast Guard Station. We're building capacity with Indigenous peoples to be involved in monitoring. And it was in that context that we made this decision. And these are jobs that are jobs in Comox. These are jobs in Fort McMurray. These are jobs, heck, they're jobs in Gander. And we have to stop the polarization. And I think Dominic said it. On one hand, we've got a party that doesn't seem to understand the economy. And on the other hand, we have a party that doesn't understand the environment. That is why we are progressive liberals. We understand that the environment and the economy go hand in hand. And let me tell you, when I talk to Canadians, they understand that. They want us to take serious action on climate change, but they also want us to be aware of the cost of living. They want us to make sure that we're creating good jobs. They want us to diversify the economy, and that is what we are doing. And that's why I need you to stand up and support what we are doing to take action on climate change, and also support projects that make sense in getting resources to market. And the last thing I'll say is that I spend a lot of time with loads of people, like with Indigenous peoples, with environmentalists, but I also spend time with business. And some of the businesses that are doing the most in terms of innovation are in the resource sector. And that you have clean tech companies working with oil and gas companies. When I was in France, alors quand j'étais en France, j'étais là avec Enbridge. Enbridge, you know what? Enbridge has just won a big tender to build offshore wind off of the coast of France. Energy companies, we need energy, and they're diversifying and looking at different ways we can do this. But the one thing I don't like in my job, I hate drama. I hate drama, I hate surprises, and I hate polarization. We are all in this together. Every single Canadian has got to be part of this, and we have to do it in a way that makes sense, that makes sure we protect our environment, and that creates good jobs for everyone, and then we will be fine. And we will continue to do this, and we will continue working across government every single day to deliver on the environment and the economy.
And if I may just put a personal note on this, my riding is in North Vancouver. It's on the Burrard Inlet, and so every oil tanker that goes right past where I am to the terminal, which is in Terry Beach's riding. And so folks in my riding had a number of questions and concerns about the proposed projects, the most important ones being, how does it fit with Canada's commitment to the climate issue, and how do we actually ensure that we are doing everything possible to prevent spills in the harbor, and making sure that the risks of that are low. My predecessor was a Conservative member of Parliament, and of course that government was not committed to doing anything on climate. And when people would go to see him and ask him about the spill issue, he would say, don't worry, there will never be a spill, which is of course something that nobody can guarantee. And so when we went through the process of making this decision, I took the legitimate concerns of my constituents to Ottawa and made sure that they were part of the conversation. And when I go back to have that conversation with those people who had those legitimate concerns, what I say to them is, we've addressed the climate issue. The emissions associated with this project are incorporated in Canada's climate plan that's been agreed upon with provinces and territories. We have made enormous commitments on the spill prevention and spill response side, such that the actual traffic that's in the harbor today will be safer after the implementation of the Oceans Protection Plan than it is today. And therefore, the decision that we made was one that did balance the economy and the environment. It's important for Canada, and it's important for British Columbia, and it's important for North Vancouver.
And I want to do a shout out.
I think Jim was...
sorry.
Just one other point of view. It's not comfortable watching the provinces of Alberta and British Columbia having such a tough conversation in public about the provincial interest. The Premier of Alberta is elected to advance those interests the best she can to be accountable to her people. And the same thing is true of the Premier of British Columbia. It's a complicated political environment in BC. We understand that. And he's going to have to be held accountable for how he represents the interests of British Columbia. There is only one government of Canada. We will be accountable for protecting the interests of the entire nation.
Did you want to make a final comment?
So, I want to give a shout out to Jonathan, because Jonathan's been out there having, difficult conversations, but now it's up to you. You're here, you're listening to us. We stand completely behind our decision, but we need to be understanding where people are at. And people are going to have questions about carbon pricing, or they're going to have questions about the expansion, the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So we need you to explain them. Understand that people have concerns. Understand that hard things are hard, but that we are taking into account these concerns. We don't just make decisions willy-nilly. We really think very hard about the environment and the economy. We listen to people. And you know what? At the end, someone's got to make a decision and stand up for what, we believe is right. And that's what we've done. But you have the chance to go out in your communities and don't shy away from what we've done. You should be super proud about what we're doing.
So I know there are probably lots of other issues relating to both the environment and the economy that we could usefully talk about, but we are actually out of time. The one thing that I would just say to folks is, having been in Ottawa now for 2.5 years, I think I appreciate far more now than I did before how hard these folks actually work. And on behalf, I think, of all Liberals, I would just say thank you to all three of you for the work that you do every day.